Hollywood in the 1970s was a strange and wonderful place. The old studio system had collapsed, young directors were getting chances nobody would have given them a decade earlier, and some of the most profitable films ever made were being shot on shoestring budgets in borrowed locations with unknown casts. So today, we're counting down the top 10 low-budget 70s movies that made millions. Number 10. Halloween, 1978. By 1978, John Carpenter was a 29-year-old director with one low-budget thriller to his name and a reputation for working fast and cheap. Producer Irwin Yablans came to him with a concept, a film about a killer stalking babysitters on Halloween night, and a budget of $300,000. Carpenter agreed, co-wrote the screenplay with Deborah Hill in 10 days, and went to work. Filming took place over 20 days in the spring of 1978 in Pasadena, California, doubling for the fictional Haddonfield, Illinois. The production was so lean that the crew sometimes numbered fewer than 15 people. The famous Michael Myers mask, one of the most iconic images in horror history, was a William Shatner Star Trek mask purchased at a costume shop for about $2, spray-painted white and modified slightly. The budget did not stretch to elaborate sets or special effects. Carpenter compensated with shadow, silence, and a Steadicam that put the audience directly behind the killer's eyes. Every creative limitation became a creative solution. The film starred Jamie Lee Curtis in her feature film debut alongside Donald Pleasence, who was the only established name in the cast and was paid $20,000 for 5 days of work, a significant portion of the total budget. Curtis was paid $8,000 for the entire shoot. The disparity between those numbers and what the film went on to earn is one of the more striking examples of how little anyone involved understood what they were making. Halloween opened in October 1978 and earned over $47 million at the domestic box office, making it one of the most profitable independent films ever produced up to that point. On a $300,000 budget, that return was nearly unimaginable. The film essentially created the slasher genre as Hollywood understood it for the next decade, and it launched Jamie Lee Curtis into a career that has now spanned nearly 50 years. John Carpenter's synthesizer score, which he composed himself to save money, became one of the most recognized pieces of music in cinema history. On every level, creative, commercial, cultural, Halloween punched far above its budget and never stopped punching. Number 9. American Graffiti, 1973. Before Star Wars, before The Force, before anyone outside of film school circles knew his name, George Lucas made American Graffiti, a film about teenagers cruising the streets of a California town on a summer night in 1962. The budget was $777,000. Universal Pictures was so uncertain about what they had that they nearly released it directly to television. Lucas filmed almost entirely at night, on location in Petaluma and San Rafael, California, over 28 consecutive nights in the summer of 1972. The shoot was chaotic. The production company ran out of money partway through and had to scramble for additional financing. Lucas and his team worked at a pace that left almost no room for error. The cast was a mix of unknowns and up-and-coming names: Richard Dreyfuss, Ron Howard, Cindy Williams, Mackenzie Phillips, Harrison Ford in an early supporting role, and Paul Le Mat. The film's soundtrack, 50 rock and roll songs from the late 1950s and early 1960s, playing continuously throughout, cost more to license than the film itself cost to shoot. Francis Ford Coppola, who served as executive producer, helped convince Universal to keep the project going when the studio lost confidence. It was not the last time Coppola would serve as a champion for a younger director who believed in a project more than the studio did. American Graffiti opened in August 1973 and earned over $115 million worldwide against its $777,000 budget. It was nominated for 5 Academy Awards, including Best Picture and Best Director. More than that, it captured something specific and real about the end of American innocence, the last summer before Vietnam, before Kennedy, before everything changed. Audiences who had lived through that era recognized it immediately. Audiences who hadn't lived through it felt the warmth and the melancholy in equal measure. It remains one of the most perfectly observed films about the specific ache of a summer ending, and about the quiet moment before a generation realized the world was about to ask something enormous of them. Number 8. The Texas Chainsaw Massacre, 1974. Tobe Hooper's The Texas Chainsaw Massacre was made for approximately $140,000, financed largely by local Texas investors who believed they were putting money into a conventional horror film. What they got was something considerably more disturbing and considerably more original than anyone had bargained for. Hooper shot the film in and around Austin, Texas, in the summer of 1973, in temperatures that regularly reached over 100 degrees. The farmhouse interiors were real, an actual abandoned house in Round Rock, Texas, and the smell inside, from the props and decoration used for the cannibal family's home, reportedly became genuinely unbearable as filming progressed in the heat. Cast members have described the shoot as one of the most physically grueling experiences of their professional lives. The conditions were, by any reasonable measure, miserable, and somehow that misery found its way into every frame of the finished film. The film starred Marilyn Burns, Paul A. Partain, Edwin Neal, and Gunnar Hansen as Leatherface, a character wearing a mask made of human skin who would become one of horror cinema's most enduring figures. Hansen, like most of the cast, was a local Texas actor with limited screen experience. He was paid $800 for the entire shoot. Burns, who carried the film's most physically and emotionally demanding scenes, received comparably little. The economics of the production were, to put it plainly, not designed with the performer's benefit in mind. Despite being banned in several countries and refused a rating by the MPAA for months, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre earned over $30 million in its initial domestic release, and considerably more internationally, and through subsequent re-releases. It has grossed over $30.9 million in North America alone across its original run. On a $140,000 investment, that was an extraordinary return. The film's raw, documentary-like quality, Hooper shot it to look almost like news footage, gave it an authenticity that polished studio horror could not replicate. It is an uncomfortable film that has never lost its power to disturb. Number 7. Rocky, 1976. The story of how Rocky got made is almost as compelling as the film itself. Sylvester Stallone was a struggling 29-year-old actor in 1975, living in near poverty in Los Angeles, when he watched a heavyweight title fight between Muhammad Ali and Chuck Wepner, a journeyman fighter who went the distance against Ali, against all expectations. Stallone went home and wrote the screenplay for Rocky in 3.5 days. He sold the script to producers Irwin Winkler and Robert Chartoff with one condition attached: he had to play the lead. The producers agreed, though the studio, United Artists, was considerably less enthusiastic about an unknown leading a boxing film. The budget was set at approximately $1 million, with Stallone taking a reduced salary to make the numbers work. To further cut costs, the film was shot almost entirely on location in Philadelphia, using real neighborhoods, real gyms, and real people as extras. The city itself became a character. The gray skies, the working-class streets, the specific texture of a place that felt both worn down and still fighting. The famous training montage, Rocky running through the Italian market, jogging through South Philadelphia, and finally bounding up the steps of the Philadelphia Museum of Art, was filmed guerrilla style, with a small crew capturing footage in real public spaces without extensive permits or crowd control. The step sequence, now one of the most iconic images in American cinema, was shot in a single morning. Rocky opened in November 1976 and earned over $225 million worldwide against its approximately $1 million budget. It won 3 Academy Awards, including Best Picture, making it one of the most decorated low-budget films in Hollywood history. Stallone received nominations for both Best Actor and Best Original Screenplay, only the second person in Academy history, after Orson Welles, to receive nominations in both categories for the same film. The film turned him from a struggling unknown into one of the biggest stars in the world almost overnight. Few films in Hollywood history have so completely and so immediately transformed a single person's life, and few films have earned it quite as honestly, because the story of Rocky and the story of Stallone fighting to make Rocky were, in the end, the same story. Number 6. Animal House, 1978. National Lampoon's Animal House was made for $2.8 million by Universal Pictures, which had doubts about the project from the beginning and gave it minimal studio support. The executives who greenlit it reportedly expected it to perform modestly and quietly disappear. What happened instead reshaped Hollywood's understanding of R-rated comedy. The film was directed by John Landis, who was 27 years old at the time, and starred John Belushi, Tim Matheson, John Vernon, Verna Bloom, Thomas Hulsey, and Donald Sutherland, who appeared in a small role for a single day of filming and was paid either $35,000 or a percentage of profits, depending on the account, a decision that ultimately made him considerably more money than he might have expected. Belushi, who was already a star from Saturday Night Live, was paid $35,000 for the lead role. Filming took place primarily at the University of Oregon in Eugene, which agreed to host the production after other universities declined. The production was fast and loose, with Landis shooting quickly and encouraging improvisation from his cast. Belushi, in particular, was given significant freedom to develop his physical comedy within scenes, and many of the film's most memorable moments came from his unscripted choices on the day. The ensemble he was embedded in was also full of performers who understood how to work off each other, a chemistry that no amount of planning could have manufactured. Animal House opened in July 1978 and earned over $141 million domestically, making it the highest-grossing comedy in American film history up to that point. The film essentially created the template for the R-rated college comedy that studios would attempt to replicate for decades, mostly without success, because most of the replications missed the specific anarchic energy that made the original work. The original has never been equaled, and probably never will be. Number 5. Carrie, 1976. Brian De Palma's Carrie was adapted from Stephen King's first published novel and made for approximately $1.8 million, modest even by mid-1970s independent film standards. King himself had famously discarded the early pages of the manuscript, believing the story wasn't working, and his wife Tabitha recovered them from the trash and encouraged him to continue. The published novel was sold for a paperback advance of $400,000 in 1973. De Palma cast Sissy Spacek in the title role, a teenager with telekinetic powers who is relentlessly bullied at school and terrorized at home by her deeply religious mother. Piper Laurie, who had been largely absent from films for 15 years, returned to play the mother, Margaret White, in a performance that earned her an Academy Award nomination. Spacek was nominated as well, remarkable for a horror film, which the Academy rarely recognized with acting nominations. Both performances have held up as among the finest of their respective careers. The film also featured early career performances from Amy Irving, Nancy Allen, John Travolta, and William Catt. Travolta had just completed his work on Welcome Back, Coder, and was on the verge of the Saturday Night Fever period that would define his early stardom. In retrospect, Carrie reads almost like a gathering of actors at the exact moment before they became who they were going to become. Carrie opened in November 1976 and earned over $33 million at the domestic box office, an extraordinary return on its $1.8 million investment. It was nominated for 2 Academy Awards. De Palma's visual style, split screens, slow motion, a prom sequence that remains one of the most effectively staged horror set pieces ever filmed, demonstrated that the horror genre could be simultaneously art and commerce, literary and visceral. It is the kind of film that announces a director has arrived and intends to stay. Number 4. Saturday Night Fever, 1977. Saturday Night Fever was produced for approximately $3.5 million by Robert Stigwood, who had primarily made his name as a music promoter and manager. The film was based on a 1976 New York Magazine article by Nick Cohn about the disco scene in Brooklyn, an article that Cohn later acknowledged was largely fictionalized, though this was not known at the time of the film's production. John Travolta was cast as Tony Manero, a young Brooklyn man working in a paint store who comes alive on the dance floor of a local disco. Travolta had been building toward this moment through his work on Welcome Back, Cotter, and his supporting role in Carrie, but Saturday Night Fever made him a genuine superstar. He prepared extensively for the role, training with choreographer Lester Wilson and learning the specific dances performed in the film. The preparation was total. Travolta committed to the physicality of the character in a way that was visible in every scene. Director John Badham shot the film primarily on location in Bay Ridge, Brooklyn, using the 2001 Odyssey Disco, a real working nightclub, for the dance sequences. The filming of the night scenes in and around Bay Ridge gave the film an authenticity that a studio recreation could not have produced. The specific texture of that neighborhood, the stoops, the street corners, the sense of young people looking for a way out of a world that felt too small, was real because it was filmed in a real place. The film understood its characters' hunger because it put the camera in the middle of where that hunger lived. The Bee Gees' soundtrack became one of the best-selling albums in recording history, which drove audiences to the film in numbers the studio had not fully anticipated. Saturday Night Fever earned over $237 million worldwide against its $3.5 million budget. Travolta received an Academy Award nomination for Best Actor. The film and its soundtrack together defined an era in American popular culture in a way that few single productions have managed. For a generation of young Americans in the late 1970s, Saturday Night Fever was not entertainment. It was a document of who they were and where they wanted to go. Number 3. Grease, 1978. Grease began as a stage musical that opened off-Broadway in 1971 and moved to Broadway in 1972, where it ran for 3,388 performances, one of the longest runs in Broadway history to that point. The film adaptation was produced for approximately $6 million, a budget that the studio regarded as modest for a musical with this level of ambition. John Travolta returned, fresh from Saturday Night Fever, to play Danny Zuko, the cool leader of a greaser gang at Rydell High. Olivia Newton-John was cast as Sandy, the good girl who falls for him. Newton-John was primarily known as a country and pop singer at the time, with limited acting experience, and she initially had reservations about whether she could carry the role. The chemistry between her and Travolta, which had to sustain an entire film, was tested in a screen test that convinced both the studio and Newton-John herself that the pairing could work. It worked more than anyone had planned for. Filming took place primarily at Venice High School in Los Angeles, with additional location work at various sites around Southern California. Director Randall Kleiser kept the production moving quickly, and the combination of choreography, original songs, and period atmosphere, the film is set in 1958, gave it an energy that translated directly to the screen. The production design captured the look and feeling of late 1950s America with an affection that audiences responded to immediately. Grease opened in June 1978 and earned over $394 million worldwide against its $6 million budget, making it one of the most profitable movie musicals ever made. The soundtrack album reached number 1 and stayed on the charts for months. Songs from the film dominated radio throughout the summer of 1978. For audiences of that summer, particularly younger audiences who were just entering adolescence, Grease was not just a film. It was the film. The one they saw multiple times. The one whose songs they memorized. The one that defined the season. Nearly 50 years later, that claim still holds. Number 2. Jaws, 1975. Jaws was Steven Spielberg's second theatrical feature, and it came close to becoming a catastrophe. The film's production budget started at approximately $3.5 million and eventually ballooned to around $9 million due to the notorious difficulties with the mechanical shark, nicknamed Bruce by the crew, which malfunctioned constantly in the saltwater environment off Martha's Vineyard, Massachusetts, where the film was shot. Spielberg, who was 27 years old during filming, was forced to improvise continuously. Because the shark rarely worked, he devised shooting strategies that kept it largely off-screen, using the point of view of the shark, Steadicam shots through the water, and the reactions of actors to suggest the creature's presence without showing it. The result? A monster that is felt rather than seen for most of the film's running time, was far more frightening than any amount of visible mechanical shark could have been. The lesson of Jaws is that imagination fills the gaps more effectively than any prop department. The cast consisted of Roy Scheider as Police Chief Brody, Richard Dreyfuss as marine biologist Matt Hooper, and Robert Shaw as Quint, the grizzled shark hunter. Shaw rewrote and delivered his own monologue about the sinking of the USS Indianapolis, one of the most chilling scenes in the film, largely on his own initiative. The chemistry between the three leads, developed during a prolonged and difficult production, produced performances that felt lived in and specific. Jaws opened on June 20th, 1975, on approximately 464 screens, a wide release for the era, and earned over $260 million domestically, with worldwide grosses ultimately exceeding $470 million. It became the first film to earn more than $100 million at the domestic box office, a milestone that had never been reached before. It created the concept of the summer blockbuster as Hollywood understood it for the next 50 years. Without Jaws, the release strategy and commercial logic of virtually every major American film that followed would have been different, and none of it would have happened if the mechanical shark had simply worked as intended from the beginning. Number 1. Star Wars, 1977. Star Wars was not supposed to be what it became. George Lucas had written multiple drafts of the script over several years, drawing on mythology, Akira Kurosawa films, Flash Gordon serials, and Joseph Campbell's writing on the hero's journey. When he finally took the concept to the studios, it was rejected by several before Alan Ladd Jr. at 20th Century Fox agreed to finance it. The production budget was approximately $11 million, significant by the standards of the mid-1970s, but modest against the scale of what Lucas was attempting. Filming took place in Tunisia for the desert sequences representing the planet Tatooine, and at Elstree Studios outside London for the interior scenes. The cast included Mark Hamill, Harrison Ford, Carrie Fisher, Alec Guinness, Peter Cushing, and Anthony Daniels as C-3PO. Harrison Ford, who had appeared in American Graffiti 4 years earlier and had largely returned to working as a carpenter between acting jobs, was cast as Han Solo after reading lines with other actors during auditions. It was not the role he had been brought in to read for. He had come to help with auditions for other actors. The production was troubled in ways that are now legendary. The robot costumes were difficult to work in. The special effects, handled by Lucas's newly formed company Industrial Light and Magic, staffed largely by young people with no experience in large-scale film effects, were being invented from scratch, frequently under crisis conditions. When Fox executives screened an early cut of the film, some reportedly walked out of the screening room uncertain about what they had just seen. Lucas himself reportedly found the process so grueling that he had health problems during post-production. None of that showed in the final product. Star Wars opened on May 25th, 1977, on 32 screens, with plans for a wider release to follow. The plan changed immediately. Lines formed around theater blocks on the first day and did not stop. The film earned over $307 million domestically and over $775 million worldwide in its original theatrical release, a number that, adjusted for inflation, remains one of the highest-grossing films in cinema history. It won 6 Academy Awards, transformed 20th Century Fox's financial position almost overnight, and changed the direction of American cinema in ways that are still being felt nearly 50 years later. No film on this list, and arguably no film in the history of the medium, produced a greater return on its investment relative to its cultural impact. Star Wars did not just make millions, it remade the movies. What connects all 10 of these films is not just the money they made, it is the specific conditions that made them possible. The 1970s were a decade when the old rules had broken down, and the new ones had not yet been written. Studios were willing to take chances on young directors and unknown casts and unconventional stories because the conventional approach had stopped working. The films that the major studios had been making through the 1960s were losing audiences, and nobody was entirely sure what would bring them back. These 10 films answered that question in 10 different ways. Rocky said that audiences wanted to believe in somebody. Jaws said that they wanted to be scared in a dark room with strangers. Saturday Night Fever said that they wanted to feel the music in their chest. Star Wars said that they wanted to be transported somewhere they had never been. And all of them said that the story still mattered, that craft and heart and genuine intention could reach through a screen and grab someone. The results were films that audiences recognized as something different, something alive and urgent, and made by people who genuinely needed to make them. You can feel that in Rocky, and in Halloween, in American Graffiti, and in Jaws. These were not films assembled by committee. They were films made by people with something to prove, on budgets that forced creativity, rather than allowing it to be replaced by money. If you grew up watching any of these films, in theaters, on early cable, on VHS tapes that you wore out from repeated viewing, you already know what made them special. And if you are discovering some of them for the first time, there is still nothing quite like watching a great film made against the odds do exactly what it set out to do. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe to our channel. so you never miss out on more content like this.